Well, Tom, we'd like to congratulate you on being named Railroader of the Year. As you know, most of our Railroaders of the Year from the freight side. You're from the transit side, which makes you somewhat unique. Tell us how you got started.
Native Chicagoan. Always knew I wanted to be an engineer. Went to the University of Illinois at Chicago Circle. And for the longest time in school, I thought I was going to be a highway engineer. But in my junior year, I realized that most of the interstates were going to get built out, and it probably wasn't a good place to start my career. And I had a very fortunate experience, serendipity. My advisor said that they had a grant from the federal government, and if I wanted to, I could work at the Chicago Transit Authority, and I took them up on it. So I went to work for a summer in their operations planning department. I got to work on service planning, got to work on issues related to rail service delivery, bus service delivery, and I enjoyed it. And then they offered me an opportunity to come back. And so as a grad trainee in the engineering degree, you were able to work in a variety of different departments. I actually ran a train, I ran a bus, worked as a conductor, and I had a fondness for electric trains when I was a boy, and I thought I could have a career in electric trains and deliver service, and that's how I got my start.
And you're still running electric trains.
Yes, and never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd come to New York, but it is one of the biggest systems in the world. And to be able to come here and work, especially in the subway network, was something I couldn't say no to.
How did that come about? Your move from the CTA to the MTA.
Actually, it came in two steps. I went to work for the federal government in a safety position. At that time, the Urban Mass Transportation Administration, now the Federal Transit Administration, was spending a lot of money building new systems in the United States. And they wanted to make sure that from a safety and a system assurance standpoint, the dollar investments they were making were being made right. When I first came up here, things were pretty bad. We had derailments every 27 days. We had car fires all over the place. We had graffiti on every inch of the system. And I says, you know, I'm going to give this 3 years because I'll get a heck of an experience, but I'm going to go somewhere else. But the system had improvements. David Gunn came in with some leadership, and we started a very, very aggressive rebuilding program, and I spent the majority of my career here in New York.
And at that time, if I recall correctly, the first major long-term capital program was instituted, which resulted in many of the improvements that you initially saw.
Absolutely. Dick Ravitch was the chairman at the time, and he went on a very, very aggressive selling campaign with his stakeholders in New York. If you remember how bad things were back then, you know, it was the bad apple, the rotten apple, as some people called it. And he made a very, very aggressive and compelling argument that if New York didn't fix its infrastructure, didn't fix its transportation system, the businesses that were traditionally here would move elsewhere. So there was a groundswell of support after that, a very aggressive selling campaign that he put in place, and we had our first $8 billion program over 5 years.
Let's move forward a bit to today. You've embarked, well, you're just at the beginning stages of a capital program that runs through 2019, which is worth
$29.5 billion.
Oh, okay.
And this governor has been just as supportive with funding the infrastructure needs here. I've been in New York the majority of my career. I've gone away, I've come back, and one of the reasons I not only came back but came running back and embraced coming back was the fact that the people who are the ones that control the decisions, whether it be the stakeholders, the elected officials, the leadership of the executive branch of government, the governor, at the end of the day, we get the money we need. You can't operate a system of this size without the money that you need.
Mm-hmm. What does it cost annually to operate the MTA, all things considered? Capital aside.
Okay, capital aside, it's a $15 billion annual budget. That accommodates not only New York City Transit, subway, and bus. That's the two commuter railroads, the two largest commuter railroads in the country, Metro North and Long Island Railroad. Bridges and tunnels, the 7 bridge and tunnel facilities that we have, we collect tolls and revenues on and help provide debt finance. The paratransit system, so it's a $15 billion annual operating budget.
You've always been a proponent of new technology, going back to the beginnings of communications-based train control on the Canarsie line. Of course, you participated in many of our conferences on that. You're very passionate about modern technology. Tell us why.
Well, in the case of signals, probably driven by my safety background. Of my 42 years in the industry, 10 years of it was directly involved in safety, whether it be at a federal level or a local level. The party accountable for making sure that there was a system safety program in place. So that was the commitment to build a control center and have an automatic train supervision system in place for the IRT So, and then build it out for the rest of the system, so we would have a real-time location identification for every one of the 540 or 560 trains that are on the system. Not more than 8 months later, August 28th, 1991, we had a very unfortunate accident at 14th Street on the East Side IRT. That was the genesis for the need to move from wayside block and jump to communication-based train control, so that we could have continuous overspeed protection for physical speed restrictions, entering crossover areas, or making sure that you don't operate into another train in front of you. That was the start of a very aggressive program to re-signal the entire system with communication-based train control. We've only been able to complete, we're on the verge of completing our second line, the number 7, but we completed the Canarsie line about 10 years ago.
Right. Now the Canarsie's in place and the second line is well underway. Now plans are moving forward at a faster clip. Yeah.
And what we've done is we've reached out to other systems in the world.
Mm-hmm.
The two systems we compare ourselves to, because they're more brownfield. In other words, how do you institute this technology on an existing legacy system, London and Paris? And we reached out to them because both of them have been on a very aggressive program to implement and install communication-based train control. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we realized that we had to do is, at one time we figured we'd do it all at once: car-borne equipment, interlockings, wayside. We've moved away from that and actually gone to attacking it in 3 different pieces. So you put the car-borne equipment on when you purchase cars, you put the communication-based train control equipment along the right-of-way, and you upgrade your interlockings along the way. So we have 3 different programs, all aimed at the same thing. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we'll have the most current state-of-the-art overspeed collision avoidance protection systems, communication-based train control.
There are many in the industry who feel that in terms of your relationship with the suppliers and how the suppliers, the signaling and train control suppliers, are involved with advanced technology signaling, that New York really drives things. Would you agree with that?
I would. I mean, first of all, given our size, we can help move the market, because when suppliers are responding to requests for proposals on competitive projects that we have, they have to have the requisite knowledge and competency, but they have to have the capacity to be able to supply. We move 2/3 of the rail traffic here in the country, commuter and subways.
Passenger rail traffic.
Passenger rail traffic, yes.
Let's talk about safety. That's your background. When you in the past few years, there have been some, unfortunately, some very public accidents and things, and safety problems have been talked about. Talk about those for a bit, and how you're addressing them, how the MTA is addressing them.
I referenced the one, which is the bad accident we had at 14th Street on the subway system,
Right.
and the need for, what came out of that was drug testing. What came out of that was the apparent obvious need to be able to install communication-based train control. More recently, we had a very bad accident at Spuyten Duyvil on Metro North. I think it was December 1st, 2013, and it reaffirmed, much the same way 14th Street did on the subway side, that we need to more aggressively implement positive train control. Mm-hmm. We need to have systems in place that can make up for human error. And we're living at a point in time that, from a standpoint of what we're asking our employees to do, and they're trying to balance their personal life and their professional life, fatigue management, making sure that we have systems in place that can overcome deficiencies that they may have.
Are there programs in place now, or are they being implemented?
Well, the PTC program, we have to comply with the same federal requirement of December 31st, 2018. We're doing that on both railroads, trying to step up that pace. It's challenging. I don't need to tell anybody in this audience that, because the Class 1 railroads know it as well. But the other issue that we're looking at, along with them, 2 basic areas. The one area is fatigue management. How do we make sure that we address issues? In the case of sleep apnea, it's a medical condition, needs to be able to be diagnosed so the person can get the treatment. You need to work within the bounds of the collective bargaining agreement. While there are challenges there, they're all doable, but you just need to face up to them. The other issue that we're concerned about is opioid use, and not necessarily abuse of opioid use. It's fairly common now, once people get to their 50s and 60s, and we're trying to treat ailments and extend life, a person may be taking 4 or 5 different medications simultaneously. What synergistic, what effect does that have on somebody in terms of their ability to be attentive, their ability to do their job? Those are things that we need to explore, because we rely on a certain amount of the activities we do on the human interface, and we have to make sure that we manage that well.
In the past few years, if you look at Metro North and you look at the NJ Transit accident in Hoboken, and even the Amtrak accident in Philadelphia, which was not sleep apnea, but it was lack of attention. Uh, I wouldn't say it's an epidemic, but it seems to be more common. And what do you possibly attribute that to?
I think those are three excellent examples. In two of the cases, there was sleep apnea. So maybe there's a desire and a need to be able to provide. I'm a firm believer in application of science to determine how you address a problem, whether it's technical, medical, human factors, or whatever. So in two of those incidents, it's sleep apnea related, so it's a diagnosis, treatment, and monitoring of it. In the third case, which was the Amtrak incident, there was no evidence of that, no evidence of interference like on a cell phone or whatever, but a lot of the activities that our employees in rail have are repetitive. And one could make an argument that at certain times, due to a variety of factors, they kind of lose track of where they're at, no pun intended. Because like, I don't want to go into the details because I'm not sure I know all the details, but I know in the Amtrak incident, you're going through a number of curves where you have to apply a brake and then you release and you can speed up. And if it's a sequential thing and you have 4 or 5 and you think you're through the last one and you're not, then you could have an undesired consequences. We've had similar things happen on our system. We have 8,000 daily train movements on a subway system, 8,000. So, you know, you can, from a system safety standpoint, say that a particular incident may be 1 in a million. That doesn't change.
You are in I'd say a unique position as chairman of the MTA. Let's talk about your relationship with the legislature, with Governor Cuomo specifically, how you came to the chairmanship job. It's a pretty interesting story. I believe.
Yeah, I came to New York, and I think I said earlier in the interview that things were so bad in the 80s, I said, I'll be here 3 years and I'll get out of town because I'll experience a lot, but I don't want to stay. But with the infusion of money and the development of a capital program and progress made, it got to be fun, got to be exciting. And you get a certain amount of a charge out of knowing that you're providing a public service for, 8.7 million people a day, 6 million in the subway and some, 300,000 or 500,000 people on the 2 commuter railroads and 2.5 million people on the buses. But so I stayed and I worked through the safety side, and I was able to transfer over to the operations side because there was a keen understanding that you needed to have people with a safety background, be part of the organization and change it. So I ran the Staten Island Rapid Transit and the Staten Island Division 2 bus depots. And then I was chief electrical officer responsible for all power signals and communications, operations, maintenance and engineering, and capital program improvements. And then I became senior vice president of operations for subways. So I worked through the operating side. I can remember when Chuck Hoppe left the railroad and Peter Stengel was the chairman, and he asked me if I wanted to be president of Long Island Railroad. And I said, I think so, but I'm not sure. And he says, well, what do you mean you're not sure? I said, the operating side of the issue I have no problems with. I'm fairly confident I'll be able to do it. It's the political side, because as you become an agency head, a certain amount of your job is in the political realm, and you have to be able to operate in that realm. So when I came back to work with Jay, because he wanted somebody to run New York City Transit, that I thought was as far as I was going to go in the industry in terms of height within an organization. He left and Joe Loda came in, and when Joe Loda left, I was named interim executive director. And so I'm sitting in a position, because this is unique in the industry. You're chairman and you're chief executive officer. So they had an acting chairman, and I was the interim executive director. And then I threw my hat in the ring, and I remember having a conversation with Governor Cuomo. And I'll never forget, one of the questions he asked was, do you really want this job? And I said, yes. I didn't hesitate. I said yes, because I'd already thought through it. And he says, no, he leaned forward, he says, do you really want this job? And I said, yes. And then he leaned forward again, he says, do you really, really, really want this job? And I said, yes. And what the point he was trying to make is, it's a challenging job. There's a lot on your plate here. You're moving a lot of people, you're responsible for a lot of assets, and people are dependent on you. And it's a difficult environment. So if you don't have the fire in your belly, you don't have the will and the resolve to do it, don't take it. So in answer to your question, long answer is, never in my wildest dreams did I ever think I wanted to be chairman. I always thought I wanted to be an agency head, but chairman is something different. But I've never regretted the decision, I got to tell you that.
You brought in some good people You brought in Ronnie Hakem to run the subways, Pat Nowakowski to run the Long Island Railroad, Joe Giulietti to run Metro North. So you've surrounded yourself with some very strong players here.
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to know all those individuals in different ways before I asked them to come here. If you're in this business long enough, I'm sure you can share this. You'll see the same people built
Sure, yep.
in different, over a period of 30, 40 years in different places. But I had the benefit of knowing each of them in different ways. Joe worked here in the organization before he went to Florida. I asked him to come back. I knew Pat because he worked at Septon. We shared information. I knew Ronnie because we both worked at New York City Transit. When I entered the business, it was more the norm than the exception that the heads of the agencies matriculated up through and became agency head after having a series of titles. Either they came from the operating side or they came from the administrative side, but they were basically self-grown. While that still exists to some extent in the industry, what is probably becoming the norm is movement of people across. And there's benefits to that. Because if you see you see the same thing from a different perspective, you may have a more wholer picture of it. And so the benefit I have with every one of those people is they worked. Two of them worked here, went somewhere else, and came back. One of them came here having never been spending time here. That's good because they will ask the question, why? Because if you matriculate up in the organization, sometimes you don't ask that question. Governor Cuomo continually asks me why, continually challenges me in the organization to think outside the box and try to change the culture. And it's something that, at first I was never resistant to. I had difficulty with, but now I understand the importance of it.
So the governor's fairly hands-on, would you say?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. He's all in a number of ways. He's all in capital program, $29.5 billion that we got. He's all in terms of asking tough questions. The two go hand in hand. And I recognize that, and the agency has recognized that. There are a lot of elected officials that at times will say on the public transportation front, have an arm's length relationship. Don't get too close, don't get too far, but have an arm's length relationship. Governor Cuomo's all in.
That's different, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
In most cases?
Yes, it is. When Governor Cuomo puts a focus on something, it's unmistakably clear. One thing transportation agencies do very well, I've yet to see one that doesn't, when there is an emergency, a derailment, collision, flood, snowstorm, with exception, there's this laser focus on what needs to be done. Governor Cuomo, in the places of where he is involved, he makes clear that focus is crystal clear and that unanimity of purpose is in place.
Mm-hmm. Of course, the MTA went through Superstorm Sandy and recovered quite well. That was pretty much at the beginning of your tenure as chairman?
The storm was October 29th, 2012. Mm-hmm. Was 4 years ago. Joe Lota was chairman. He left being chairman at the end of that year. He ran for mayor. So I was president of the Transit Authority during the event, mm-hmm. but I was interim executive director up until June, and then I became chairman mm-hmm. when we were implementing all the, we lost the Montague Street Tube here for the R. We lost the Rockaways. So I was instrumental in terms of what we did to shut down the system and protect it, and what we did to actually restore service. Mm-hmm. While it was by far the most significant event that this system ever saw, it showed very clearly to everybody. If you're a public transportation professional, you always know how important your system is. You do it for love of whatever. It was the only time in my life where everybody who missed the service because it was out basically said, please come back. Please come back. Mm-hmm. And we demonstrated how really, we always say the subway system and New York City Transit and the MTA is the lifeblood of New York. That was an effective demonstration.
So since the recovery, what things are being done to harden the system if something like this, God forbid, ever happens again?
Well, first we had to replace those assets that saw significant damage. Water and electricity doesn't go well. Salt water and electricity is even worse. Because if you have something that's an electrical circuit immersed in water, it's maybe 50% of the time you can remove all the water, you can dress up the electrical equipment, and it can be restored to as normal condition. With salt, it's a little bit different because when the water goes away, the salt conductive paths remain, and it just wreaks havoc on electrical systems. So we had to replace elements that were damaged. But we replaced them with things that were more resilient. And I'll give you one that people will think it's a joke, but it's not. You know, because if you say to a normal person a submarine cable, they would think a cable in a submarine. But what it really means is a cable that will be immersed in a marine environment, in water, okay? So we now know, in the life of our underriver tubes, they will flood. The Canarsie tube has flooded in my lifetime, in my career here 3 times, okay? So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how often. So when you put equipment in, put it in with the understanding that either you have better design elements to keep them dry, or if they do get wet, they can dry out and you can, so we're doing a number of those things. There are openings in lower Manhattan that we know in a category 2 or 3 storm event are going to flood. And before that, we had very rude and crude ways of putting plywood down and sandbags to protect those openings. We've now spent money to put in mechanical systems that somebody can go flip a lever and close off those vent gratings. The vent gratings have to be open when we run normal service for ventilation, but you definitely want them closed when there's a storm event. So we've spent billions of dollars of restoring the system and hardening the system.
Yeah. The South Ferry was that was the new
South
Ferry. That was
Yeah.
the worst example. That was the
Worst,
worst.
it was the worst example. Yeah. It's still not back for service. Thank God we didn't totally close out the old South Ferry because we're still using that system. But we know there will be another storm event. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
So let's talk about the capital program and some very big projects that are coming to fruition. We have East Side Access, and of course
Second Avenue.
Second Avenue, number 7 extension recently opened. At Second Avenue Subway, that has been in the works since what, 1950? I think.
No, the first
Or
bond
before
issue
that?
for Second Avenue was in the late 20s, early 30s.
Okay.
So the city knew that there was a need.
And you're finishing it.
We're finishing first phase. So, and the governor has been pretty insistent that we meet the committed deadline of December 31st, which we're confident we'll do. So, time will tell, but that's what we're doing. Because the other thing he's asked us to do, and it's somewhere between an ask and a tell, is in order to change the culture, you need to set the bar high. So you need to be in a position where you make a commitment and you meet that commitment. Second Avenue will be a tremendous benefit to the city of New York and to the system. What it's going to enable us to do is to offload a lot of the capacity problems we have on the Lexington Avenue line, because the Lexington Avenue line is as far east as you go. You've got residential densities in the form of 80,000 to 100,000 people per square mile. And what they have to do is walk from, you know, wherever their house is, you know, between the East River and Lexington Avenue over to Lexington Avenue. Lexington Avenue line is the most heavily traveled line in the country, 500,000 people a day. That's more than I think Washington and Chicago combined on a daily basis. So when we open up the stations at 63rd, 72nd, 86th, and 96th for phase 1, phase 2 will go north at that point, you're going to see a lot of people not have to trundle over to Lexington Avenue line. So it'll be a better commute for them, and it'll open up capacity in the Lexington Avenue line. And it'll be, I think the stations will be pretty striking because they won't be the typical IND design, which was our latest design of, you know, cut and cover, track level, mezzanine, a lot of columns, whatever. These are very open, spacious stations. You'll like them.
So a lot of tunneling involved with
Yes.
with Second Avenue.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, the
Over and under a lot of existing infrastructure.
there were some elements of it built that they tied into. But, you know, a lot of people don't realize it because people that come to Manhattan now, you see a very flat terrain. The original Manhattan was not flat. You had hills and valleys, you had rock strata, and when they filled it in to make it flat, you had a lot of fill that wasn't rock. So where you tunnel here, you can actually tunnel through rock as well as tunnel through, you know, soils. And there were challenges. There was a point in time where in the construction of the tunnel, they had to freeze the soil so that the boring machine could continue its work.
How does it feel to have the first phase of Second Avenue completed during your tenure? What does that do for you?
Well,
for you personally, you know, your sense of accomplishment.
People have asked me that, and the best way for me to answer it is that I had so many mentors in my career and people that preceded me that I admired and learned from. And the one common element all of them had was they took the job they inherited and left it in a better condition than what they inherited in. So I've kind of ascribed to that theory. I've also understood that the development of some projects takes years, and it may take years beyond the tenure of one individual. So in some cases, I've got credit for projects that somebody else started, and in other cases, somebody's got credit for projects that I started.
You started.
I started communication-based train line for Canarsie, but I wasn't here when it was when I was away. There's a plaque with my name on it, with Governor Mario Cuomo and Peter Stengel at Penn Station, and I had been president only 3 or 4 months when the project got completed, but Chuck Hoppe, my predecessor, really deserved the credit. So when you ask the question about Second Avenue, I'm proud to have been chairman when we opened it up and make full on a promise made in the early part of the 20th century, but the credit goes to the people that were involved in that project. And the one thing that, but I can say that not just for Projects Bill, I can say that for the system that runs. What happened in Hurricane Sandy and what we were able to do to protect the system and bring it back as fast as it did was the result of labor, management, hourly employees, supervisors, managers, everybody working together. They get the credit.
Okay, blue sky, okay? Say money is no object. What would you like to see in terms of connectivity? You know, things like connecting Grand Central with Penn. There's a lot of things that have been talked about over the years. What would you like to see? What do you think this region needs?
First and foremost, it needs communication-based train control throughout the entire system. And one may say that's not an expansion, but it is, because you can increase capacity. The way to increase more trains per hour is with communication-based train control. So if you assume that's a given, we can do it as fast as possible. Now we get into the issue of how do we expand the system. Continuation of phase 2 of 2nd Avenue up to 125th Street, with stations at I think 106th, 116th, and 125th Street. Have it bend west and touch with Metro North. Penn access for Metro North. When East Side access starts to bring 24 trains an hour into Grand Central, we're going to free up tunnel slots. There are people on the New Haven line and on the other lines of Metro North that want to go to Penn Station, even more so then than now. Why? Hudson Yards. Hudson Yards is the biggest residential commercial development in the world in terms of the amount of money that's being spent there. So that's another project. Through running service between New Jersey and New York. Right now we do it in a very ad hoc way for the Giant specials, for example, off the New Haven line to come through and go to Meadowlands or MetLife Stadium. But if you want to increase the capacity of Penn Station, which is the most heavily traveled train station in the country, you do it through running, because you're not having to turn trains in the station, because right now that limits capacity. So Gateway is a step in doing that, but purchase of equipment between New Jersey Transit, Metro North, and Long Island Railroad that is compatible that you can have through running a service. Those are some examples. There are others. I mean, there has always been the long-running need of a train to a plane. There's been a long-running need of extensions of the system, like a more one-seat direct ride from west to Hudson. And you prioritize those, and you make a point of taking bite-sized chunks on them and build them.
The MTA has established a place for itself on the world stage. As we speak, the UITP is having a forum here. There seems to be more synergy now between the U.S. systems, or North America, I could say, and Europe, or globally.
No, there is.
More broadly.
And we do interface with a number of the systems here in North America. Toronto and New York City Transit are pretty much comparable. But when you take a look at, especially when you talk about assets, and that's where we can make some comparisons, I think, with Class 1s. Class 1s are different than us. They're profit centered. They're moving freight. They're doing different things. But when it comes to whole life asset management, there's similarity there, okay? So when we look, now I'm coming back to the issue with UITP. The two systems that are closest to the challenges we have on the subway or rail transit side are London and Paris. And so the way in which they approach not only whole life asset management, but how they expand the system and how they introduce new technology, they have some of the same things. And what's going on a global front in terms of experiences they have are probably more translatable to what we have here. That's not to say that there's no translatable experience in the United States with us. There are some, but there's a greater synergy between us and London and Paris than other systems here.
Do you want to talk about APTA?
Well,
I know it's a sensitive subject.
No, it's fine.
But
it's pretty well known. I mean, we took a position, and it was talk about it in the sense that, in the long term, we belong to being part of APTA. We've committed that to APTA, and I want to say that. We need to stand together on a congressional level. We need to stand together when we're seeking partners at the federal level in terms of the needs that we have. So the degree to which we can be aligned with APT and part of APT is in our interest, okay? There was a point in time, over a long period of time, where we felt that we were becoming more dissimilar to what APTA was than similar. And so we took a position that for a period of time we were going to leave APTA, and that's where we're at right now.
How long have we been? Well, we've been at this for a while. Jeez.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that
yeah,
I'd like to raise.
Things that we haven't
yeah,
addressed
absolutely.
that you.
We look to Class 1s from the standpoint of infrastructure and whole life asset management because the size of their assets are comparable, if not larger. Our asset, our physical structures, our track, our systems, our stations, valued at $1 trillion. $1 trillion. Mm-hmm. So Class 1s have to maintain their asset. They won't be profitable if they don't. And what they need to do is, the first level is make sure it's safe and reliable. And I won't tell you that's easy, but that's the first step. But how do you get the most extensive life out of each asset? Because if a rail car today, when I started in this business, a rail car lasted about 30 or 35 years. We've been able to have rail cars in terms of structure last 50 now. We're using Core 10 steel. We're doing much better things in terms of the manufacturing process, taking care of the cars. Stainless steel construction, we're getting 45 to 50 years out of a car. So if the cost of a car is $2.5 to $3 million, and you can get 15 more years life out of it, that's money that you free up for investment in other parts of the asset, or expansion if you want to do expansion. So the ability for us to have whole life asset management systems in place where the manager of the asset, and I'm not talking about a budget manager, I'm not talking about the service delivery manager. Somewhere in New York City Transit, there is an individual, I happen to know his name. Mm-hmm. He is responsible for maintenance of the track asset. I want that individual to have all the information he or she needs to be able to say, instead of replacing track on this curve at 30 years, I can replace it at 32. Safely and reliability, not affecting service, but saving the reinvestment of that asset for something else. We have to get our whole life asset management systems to that level. We've had discussions with Class 1 railroads that are further down the road than us on that, and much better because they have to. And that's where I'm aggressively looking to share as much information as possible, because the destiny of this organization for the next 100 years will be dependent on our ability to get that right.
Okay. I did want to ask you about your relationship with Amtrak. Now under new management, how would you describe your relationship with Amtrak? It's changed considerably.
Started 100,000 feet and worked
yeah.
down. We have a symbiotic relationship with Amtrak. In the days of when the MTA inherited the Long Island Railroad, I think it was the Rockefeller administration, for $60 million, we bought from the Pennsylvania Railroad Long Island as we know it. For another $15 million, we could have had Penn Station. I can easily say Rockefeller should have made the $50 million, then it was a lot of money, and have it, and then we'd be in total control of our destiny. Because right now, we're in control of our destiny up to Herald, but from Herald into Penn Station, we're dependent on Amtrak. So there's this symbiotic relationship, because we need each other. And now NJ Transit is operating in there as well, okay? So long-standing relationship with Amtrak, over the long term, excellent relationship. It's not without its challenges and fits and starts. Very good relationship with Joe Boardman, Tony Kosha, chairman. We've met Wick Moorman. Whether it's Gateway, whether it's East Side Access, whether it's improvements to Moynihan, we have to find improved ways to live better together. What does that mean? There's no acrimony. How do we get all that work done? How do we get all those projects completed with all those completing resources in a way where NJ Transit is not affected on a day-by-day basis, Amtrak's not affected on a day-by-day basis, Long Island Railroad and Metro North aren't affected. In the case of Metro North, Amtrak operates over its track to get into New York. In the case of Long Island Railroad, we operate over Amtrak's track to get into New York. We've met with Wick. It was a very good first meeting. He's committed to making sure that we have periodic meetings and alignment of priorities and resources, and so it's off to a very good start. It was good under Joe Boardman, too. Mm-hmm. Both organizations understand the importance of having a very healthy relationship.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much,
Sure.
Tom.